Hello everyone, welcome to this channel again. So in this session, we are going to talk about the client-server communication. If you still remember our last session, the first thing we talked about is the three components of a system, right? So it includes the app, or you can call it client, right? Which is your Instagram app, your TikTok app, or just a website, right? And also the second component is the server, which is, in our case, is a web-based server, or you can just call it a web server, okay? So in this session, we're going to talk about how app send request to the web server and how the web server can send back the response or data to the app. So how they interact or how they talk with each other, okay? So first, let's say now you are visiting a website, which is, let's say, facebook.com, okay? So that's the app or web, right? So basically what you would do is, I would input a website URL, which is https, let's say facebook.com, or maybe www.facebook.com. Okay, so this is a URL you are going to input in your browser. So how does it know which server he's going to talk about? Which server he's going to send the request to, right? So in order to send a request, it must know the IP address, okay, of the server. Oh, I opened the website. Interesting. Okay, cool. So let's see. Okay, you must know the IP of the server, right? So how do I know the IP of the server? How do I know the IP of the server which www.facebook.com is hosted, right? So now you need another server or another component, which is called DNS. Okay. So the full name is domain name system, which is it will map a domain, in this case it's facebook.com, to the IP address of the servers of this domain, okay? So usually DNS is owned by your internet provider. So when you connect to your internet provider's network, you already know the IP address of this DNS server. So you can just send a request to the DNS web server, okay, to get the IP address of facebook.com. So here you just send a DNS request, okay, and the DNS will respond to you the IP address of facebook.com server, okay? So now you have the IP address, so now you can just send a request to the server. Cool, now you can send it. Okay, so now let's talk about how you send the request, right? So there must be some language you talk. You must talk the same language, right? So for example, if I talk to another person, in order to have a good communication or the correct communication, you must know the same language, right? So for example, both of us need to see English, or both of us need to see Chinese or some other language, right? So what language do they speak, right? So in the computer world, we call that protocol, right? And mostly for web-based server or web-based application, the protocol is HTTP or HTTPS. We can talk about the difference between these two later. in later sessions, but now I believe you already know HTTP, right? So for example, in this URL, you already specify the protocol you are going to use, which is HTTPS, right? So basically, the common language they are going to talk with, or the protocol you are going to use to talk from between the client and the web server is HTTP, okay? So that's how you talk with each other. Now, yes, this is a protocol we are going to use, right? But what format? What is the format of the request? And what is the format of the response I need to receive? So that also needs to have some definition, right? That also needs to be aligned between the app and the web server, right? So how you are going to send a request? I think you hear this a lot, which is REST API, okay? Okay, so basically what it looks like. So REST API is designed for web-based application. So it also uses HTTP and HTTPS, right? It's built on top of HTTP. So basically when you send a request, it's also in the form of HTTP, okay? So let's say you want to get the information about a specific post from Facebook, right? So in this case, the way you send the request is you just send a URL to the server, which is facebook.com. And let's say you want to get a post, right? And in this case, you know the post ID, okay? So in this request, what you want to know is, oh, I want to get the post information about this specific post specified by this post ID, right? Okay, now when the server received this request, it knows the URL of this request. And from the URL, it knows the post ID, right? Then it sends the request to the backend database to fetch the post information, including all the metadata and all the medias attached to the post, right? Just based on this post ID, okay? So this is the REST API, right? This is how you send the request from the app to the web server, okay? Now let's talk more about the different kinds of requests from the REST API, right? So in this case, in the case I gave here, you just want to get information about a specific post, right? So this type is called get. So you want to get a resource from the backend, from the web server, right? But there is another case, which is, oh, I created a new post from my app, right? So I input the text for the post. I uploaded the images, uploaded videos to this post. Now I click the post button in my app. So now it will send a request to the web server. So I can write or I can persist this post in my database, right? So in this case, you are writing something to the database or to the web server, right? So in this case, we call it a post request. And in reality, it's put request because it's you are creating something, right? So usually you need to use a put request. So what the URL looks like in this case? It will be something like, HTTPS www.facebook.com and post, okay? Yeah, you are going to ask one question. Where is the information about the post? For example, my post name, the text of my post, it's not in a URL, right? Where it is. In fact, for HTTP request, for this kind of put REST API, the information or the metadata is not actually given in the URL. It's unlike the GET. Usually for a GET request, you just put what you want in the URL, right? So in this case, it's a post ID. However, for a put request, you don't show the content in the URL. It's in the HTTP request data body, right? So it will be something like, it can be any format you would like to use, right? But most commonly you would use JSON data, right? So for example, in the request body, in the HTTP request body, you would say, oh, this is the title of my post. It's something, right? And also, what's the text of the post? It's something, right? So for example, I am happy or something. And also you have the media files, right? So you have the URLs to medias, right? Media means video or pictures or photos, right? So, and you have some URLs here, okay? So this is so all the request data is in the HTTP request body, okay? It's not in the URL itself, okay? So this is a put request. You are writing data, right? Writing a new data to your web server. However, there is another kind of request, which is, oh, I already have a post. Now I'm editing. For example, I changed the title of my post, or I deleted my media files and I replaced it with some new ones, right? So in this case, you need to update the existing resource on your web server, right? So in this case, mostly you will send a different kind of REST API request, which is called post. Okay, cool. So this is a DNS request you are going to, sorry, not a DNS request. So the URL is very similar to the put request. So it could be something like www.facebook.com. And it's still post, right? Because you are changing a post. And here you also have the data, the actual request, the data in the HTTP request body or in the REST API body, right? So here mostly you would say, oh, I want to change the post title to this thing, title. Okay, so this is the title, for example, some new title, okay? And also you need to specify which post I want to modify, right? So there are two ways to do this. First is, yeah, you just give the post ID in a JSON format, in the JSON data. But usually because we are using REST API, right? In REST API, you usually specify the resource ID you want to modify just in the URL. So here you would say, oh, I want to specify this is a post ID I want to modify, right? So this is a best practice to use REST API, okay? But I don't want to go into details of the REST API. That's another topic. I just want to have a very high level overview of the three different kinds of requests you are going to see, okay? So, and the last one, we also have the last one, which is delete, right? So you want to delete your post from the server. In this case, you want to send a delete REST API request. So this, from the high level, this is how REST API works, right? Okay, so this is part one of our client-server communication. Let's see each other in part two, okay? Thank you.